They sent out a dove. It wobbled home, wings slicked in a rainbow of oil, a sprig of tinsel snagged in its beak, a yard of fishing line binding its feet. Welcome back to Litcast. In this episode, we're going to be exploring Ark by Simon Armitage. The 2019 poem Ark by Simon Armitage, who was the UK Poet Laureate, presents an urgent ecological protest that reimagines Noah's Ark, the Bible story, to address modern environmental degradation, which is a great word to use. So written to commemorate the launch of the polar research ship RRRS, Sir David Attenborough, the poem uses specific polar imagery to map a global climate crisis. So let's have a think about some of the big ideas here. First of all, we've got inversion of hope into warning. So the poem's central sort of mechanism is the subversion of the Noah myth, or the Bible story. While the biblical ark represents salvation and kind of a new beginning, Armitage's ark is actually a report on human-driven ruin. So, for example, the dove, which is traditionally the symbol in the story of hope, where the dove flies and comes back with the olive branch, it actually returns as a symbol of hopelessness that's kind of burdened by oil and human debris. We also have ecological vertigo and dislocation. So Armitage uses this kind of surreal imagery to show a planet in chaos. So by depicting animals in settings where they don't belong, incongruous settings, like desert camels in floods or tropical caimans in Arctic lakes, the poem makes this kind of abstract concept of habitat loss feel disorienting, almost like we have vertigo. So it's dizzying, this level of destruction, and also very immediate. The poem also highlights a moral demand for restoration, and that's humanity's debt, ultimately, to Earth. It shifts the blame from divine judgment to human negligence and really emphasises that we caused the deluge of pollution and are solely responsible for salvaging what remains of our planet. Another major theme is the replacement of natural geography with synthetic waste. So plastic is described as forming its own islands and states, which suggests ultimately that human mistakes have become a permanent feature of the Earth's landscape and are actually rivaling some of the natural land masses and natural landscapes that are out there. And then we talked about this in previous episodes, but thinking about binary opposition, so contrasting forces within literature, and particularly in poetry, can be really useful to focus your ideas. And here we've got this idea of salvation versus observation. So the boat at the end of the poem represents the Sir David Attenborough, and unlike the Ark, which was built as a boat of salvation to save species, this modern vessel is simply built to document their disappearance, to observe their disappearance. It offers a fragile hope that scientific observation might move humanity to finally stop the destruction, but it's not as happy an end as the ending of the Noah's Ark story. So let's think about some context here. So the poem was actually commissioned by the British Antarctic Survey for the 2019 naming ceremony of the research vessel, which we now know is called the Sir David Attenborough. This specific context therefore explains the poem's heavy use of polar imagery, like glaciers, ice sheets, snow caps. As Poet Laureate, that's a really significant role, kind of like the lead poet of a country, Armitage uses the position that he's in, his public platform, to respond to national concerns, as is really his role in that position, his responsibility. He bridges the gap between scientific jargon and personal emotion by using that shared language of biblical imagery, and this really makes the climate change feel immediate and understandable. And we also have intertextuality. So if you think about intertextuality, this is where there's references to other texts within a text. So here, as we've already mentioned, this relies heavily on the reader's knowledge of Genesis, the book of Genesis from the Bible, in particular 6 to 9. By referencing the dove, the olive leaf, and the boat, there's this comparison between the world once promised and then this modern world which has been pushed dangerously out of balance. And this this kind of world level event in the Bible that completely wipes the earth clean and gives it this kind of clean slate, shows the scale at which we are looking at this problem. It is a world level problem. So let's think about some of the thematic contrasts and ideas in here too. So we have, as well as some of the observation versus salvation that we had before with the boat, we've got humanity versus nature as the bigger conflict here. Nature is the fragile order, and it's been violently disturbed by human agency. We also have anxiety, and we've got urgency. So there's a repetition of bringing back. So bring back acts as this kind of urgent demand, and it reflects a deep-seated anxiety that we're running out of time and that these systems are slipping out of control. And finally, we've got nostalgia and a bit of loss. So the pleas to bring back the leaf, as well as presenting that sense of urgency, also represent that desperate longing for this lost equilibrium that may no longer be possible to get back, to retrieve. So that's some notes and context and big ideas on the poem Ark by Simon Armitage. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. You can check out some other ones on the anthology on our page, and we will see you in the next one. Thank you for listening to Litcast, the podcast for GCSE and A-level revision. The music that you hear in this episode is called Galaxy and was written by Ixon, and you can find the rest of his music on SoundCloud. If you found the podcast helpful and would like to support us further, then the Ko-fi link in the description will give you an opportunity to tip us. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in the next one.